Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 5 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Alan Ryan's On Politics, a book talking about the history of political theory from the ancient Greeks up into the modern day. And this time we're moving away from the Greeks and actually getting into the Romans. We're going to be looking at Polybius and Cicero in this episode and what they have to say about the Roman system and why it has worked better than any other system than we've seen so far. What are your thoughts on this chapter? You said cryptically before we started recording that you have to confess something, and then you said we'll save that for when we start recording.
Well, I have to confess that right now I'm a little cranky because we took 20 minutes trying to get this thing set up, and now your video is not coming over Zoom, but the audio has been fixed, and I have to confess the reason why the audio isn't working on my end is because I had the printer hooked up as opposed to the soundboard. So,
That would make sense. That the printer cannot record audio.
but now I'm just looking at myself talking to you because I can't see you. So
Yes, that is something going on with my laptop. Yes.
I usually appreciate seeing your reactions to whatever my rants are, but
Yes.
I'll just have to imagine it.
Yes, I'm very sorry about that. Is that all you had to confess, or was there something more?
That's all I'm going to confess.
That is very worrying. I'm not sure what that means.
I don't know. It's a regular confession joke. You know, I don't have anything specifically in mind.
All right. Should we go ahead and jump into the
Yes.
content for today?
Well, what do you want to give us any preliminary thoughts of what you thought of Polybius and Cicero, their thoughts about the Republic?
I thought it was a good chapter. It was much more like based on like the historical fact rather than I think these two authors themselves. He doesn't go too much into what Polybius has to say. He makes a few comments like here and there, but it's more so about the actual content of his stuff, the actual history that Polybius describes. He gets more into Cicero's like exact philosophies and stuff like that towards the very end, but I feel like most of it was pretty much historical information in this one.
Yeah, it really was. It was about them and about the Republic as it existed. And I think that's mainly what these two authors were doing anyway.
Hmm.
We're trying to, like Rome is great. This is why,
Yes.
and so you have to understand what Rome was at the time, or the main structure. And so I thought it was interesting. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was thinking about three quarters into it. Well, it's just is more of like a history of Rome during that period.
Yeah.
As opposed to what's the philosophy of Cicero and Polybius.
Hmm. True. Very
But
true.
it was enjoyable to read. I do like the author,
Hmm.
although he keeps apologizing to modern readers for these bad thoughts about these authors. He should have just had a disclaimer in the introduction, which always pisses me off. But he should have had a disclaimer in the introduction just to cover all this, to say,
Yes.
hey, a lot of these old dudes lived under slavery and they didn't believe in equal rights for women. Okay, so just understand that and you have to deal with it.
Hmm.
And then he wouldn't have to keep apologizing for it or keep explaining it or castigating, oh, they should have thought of this, or it doesn't ring true to a modern ears. Okay, all right, man, just explain what they said. Yeah.
That is a fair point. That is a good point.
I'm a fair man.
Yeah. All right. So he starts off this chapter talking about who Polybius and Cicero actually were. So Polybius was a highly educated Greek aristocrat from Achaia, and he was very active in the military and political life. He was born between 200 and 190 BC, and he was taken to Italy as a hostage in 168 in the last of the Macedonian Wars. Of course, he was a Greek. So he was in exile for 18 years, and during this time he became friends with Scipio Africanus the Younger, the adoptive grandson of Scipio Africanus, the conqueror of Hannibal. So he spent his exile in Rome, learning all about the Republic, but was allowed to return home in 150, and later accompanied Scipio and witnessed his destruction of Carthage in 148. He later acted as a mediator with the Romans and died from a fall from his horse at age 82 in 118. So he had a pretty active life, lived a very long life, especially for those times, but was very active in the military scene. On the other hand, Cicero was born 106, so was born a few years after Polybius died, and he was born to parents of the class of the equites, the knightly rank below the senatorial elite of Rome. So Cicero's father sent him to Rome to learn how to advance himself as a new man. He served as a soldier at age 16 in the Social War of 90 between Rome and its Italian allies. He learned rhetoric from the best orators and met some notable philosophers, including the Stoic Diodotus. And while studying rhetoric in Athens from 79 to 77, he encountered the rival schools of the Peripatetics and the Academics, acquiring the ability to refute either side, and that gave him the idea that in the absence of certainty, we should defend whatever doctrine seemed most persuasive on any given occasion. And so that kind of gives you an idea of who he was as a statesman in his later life. Very, very persuasive. He was also very ambitious. He became quaestor in 75, praetor in 66, and consul in 63, each of those pretty high-ranking positions, and he became each of those positions at the absolute minimum age that you could be. So he entered into those positions at the earliest popular time. But by this time, Rome had experienced 2 bouts of civil war and was not going in a great direction.
That's just put it mildly.
Yeah, no kidding. And so, as consul, Cicero was faced with the insurrection of Catiline and his conspirators, and so convinced the Senate to agree to the summary execution of any of these conspirators, a flagrantly illegal action. But Cicero was praised for this because it was believed to have prevented civil war, and that's something that Cicero was very proud of throughout the rest of his life. He was not a very modest man. Catiline was later mourned.
Well, the phrase "the laws are silent amid the clash of weapons," which is a justification for the summary execution.
Yes, that's a good quote. So Catiline was later mourned by the populares, the leaders of the poorer Romans, for he promised to forgive their debts. Cicero belonged to the optimates, the defenders of the upper class who were opposed to debt forgiveness or any sort of equalization of property. When Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus established the triumvirate in 60, he refused to be the 4th member, instead allying with Cato the Younger, the leader of the Optimates, and so was exiled in 58, but later brought back. And his abilities as an advocate were really no longer relevant amidst these emperors. He kept backing the losing side in further conflicts. And so after the assassination of Caesar and the rise of Octavian and Mark Antony, Cicero made a series of violent speeches against Mark Antony, and this secured his death. I'm going to read from the book here. Mark Antony formed a short-lived alliance with Octavian, the future Caesar Augustus, in 43, and each gave the other a free hand in murdering his enemies. They concluded, reasonably enough, that Caesar's leniency towards his enemies after the Civil War had allowed them to conspire against him and in the end to kill him. They were not going to repeat that mistake. They also wanted to seize the property of wealthy men to reward their supporters, and the bloodletting was considerable. It is said that 300 senators and 2,000 equites were killed. In Cicero's case, Antony indulged himself in some notable brutality. He had Cicero's head and hands cut off and nailed to the speaker's rostrum in the Senate to remind everyone of the perils of speaking out against tyranny. Cicero died bravely. Attempting to flee, he was overtaken by his enemies. He put his head out of the curtains of the litter in which he was being carried, stretched out his neck, and told his murderers to do their job quickly. And that is how Cicero died, essentially daring them, somewhat like Socrates, to just go ahead and do it already.
Right.
And so what do you think? Do you have any thoughts about the lives of these 2 people?
Well, I thought it was really interesting. I always like the parallels to our modern times and stuff, but the Catiline, how the lower classes or the poor people really loved him because he promised to forgive their debts, and it kind of struck me as like the student debt. That's a modern issue or recent issue in the papers, completely illegal. But we'll see how that develops over time. But I would think of how powerful it would be if the president or wannabe dictator would say, you support me, not only wipe out your student debt, but all your credit card debt, your mortgage, and all your medical bills, all your debt. Just wipe it out. Just imagine it. And I bet you, there'd be a lot of people motivated to help out that guy or gal.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I think that's and back in the what was it, the financial crisis of '08. You were very young, but they had a big bailout of GM and the financial system, Goldman Sachs and all those crooks up in Wall Street and in Washington, and spent trillions of dollars. And I was thinking at the time, you know what? Instead of bailing the banks out, you're gonna spend all that money. Why don't you just wipe out everybody's mortgage debt?
Yeah.
Imagine how much of a well, of course, it'd be inflationary, but nobody cares about that now anyway. But it would have been kind of a different take on if you're going to hand out money, who could you give it to? Or we ended up just giving it to the super wealthy to wipe out, basically correct all their stupid investment decisions. But
yeah,
you could see how you can have a lot of people support somebody in the Civil War if they have that kind of money riding on it.
Hmm.
It's interesting to see because if we're going to give away, why stop at $10,000 in student debt? Why don't you just wipe the whole thing out? If you
Yeah,
can do that, why can't you wipe out the credit card debt? If you can do that, why can't you wipe out everything else?
true.
I mean, chaos would result, but so what? But yeah, I mean, Cicero certainly led an interesting life and and had some well thought out ideas of the way the government should work or has worked in the defense of the Roman Republic, such as it was.
Yeah, they were definitely very experienced, and I think that's a big thing that we'll see throughout what they describe is that, you really have to experience these types of governments to really know anything about them.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're definitely not utopian thinkers. They're
yes.
practical thinkers, and I'm always taken aback when it's just so fascinating to read about these people that were powerful at the time, like Greek city states and Roman Republic, and like that the Polybius was taken hostage for
Hmm.
18 years. So it's 18 years of his life, and he basically had to create a new life in Rome.
Yeah.
And the alternative, it's better than the alternative, which would have been a summary execution, I suppose,
Hmm.
or torture and death. It's just so different than what we have in today's society, and interactions with other countries or other forces.
Hmm. Absolutely. So we then move into how we're kind of essentially moving in a different direction than we have been previously in this book. Alan Ryan essentially says that turning from Plato and Aristotle is a different way to think about politics entirely. We now turn to statescraft, which is
Mm-hmm.
focused on the political practitioner, politician, statesman, or ruler, and the viability of the constitutional arrangements within which he operates. And this is where we see that experience is all important. And so there's a good quote from Polybius here about his opinions on utopias. He says, "As for Plato's celebrated republic, I do not think it is admissible that this should be brought into the argument about constitutions. For just as we do not allow artists or athletes who are not duly registered or have not been in training to take part in festivals or games, so we should not admit the Platonic constitution to this contest for the prize of merit, unless some example can be provided of it in action." So definitely that sort of condemnation of we don't really care about the theoretical stuff. We need to focus on what will really work. We need to focus on how we can give advice to people.
Amen, brother.
And so Cicero's whole approach was that he wanted to teach Romans about what Plato and the Stoics had to say about justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom, but for political reasons. He says the value of philosophy was usefulness to the republic. His best thought of the best thought of the Greeks would improve young men's characters and ensure they would not behave with greed, cruelty, vanity, and short-sightedness that were bringing the republic to its knees. So it definitely wasn't just a disregard for philosophy. It was just the thinking that we can use philosophy and help make great leaders. We can actually put it to the test and actually, enact change instead of just thinking about what's the best. Let's actually put this into action and do something
Mm.
with it, which I think we'll both be fans of here, moving away from Plato and especially Plato and a little bit of Aristotle in this regard.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of you, but I like the description of them that they are Greek in inspiration and Roman in purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was really what they're trying to do is you can talk about theory, but what is the point of it? When you're talking about political theory, and I think when you're talking about any theory, you have to have some sort of rubber meets the road moment where okay, we can talk about all these issues, but what does it really mean to us in a practical sense, or what does it mean to society, and why?
Mm-hmm.
Because Plato's Republic, well, first of all, in theory, it's just crap. But well, let's say it was somehow workable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's put it in action. Where's it ever been tried? But then it's similar to like the communists. Well, communism has never been tried.
Yeah.
You just have to keep trying a new one because it hasn't worked. Well, we just haven't tried it right yet. We haven't tried Plato's Republic either, I guess.
That is
Well,
true.
because it wouldn't work. It's just theoretical waste of time.
Yeah, it's kind of actually,
Actual waste of time. Theoretical, you know, study.
yes. It's kind of like actually applying what Aristotle was saying, finding the purpose of things. And here's exactly where we're trying to do that. Cicero's, okay, I've looked at your philosophies. These are good philosophies. Now let's find where they fit into the purpose of things. Let's actually put them to practice. Let's actually use these things instead of just talking about them.
Right. And he seems to agree. I think I have myself, but with the theory of a just society
Mm-hmm.
and just rulers and very much agrees, I think, with Aristotle as far as having an educated
Mm-hmm.
citizenry to be able to select the proper ruler. And that even if you he's taken the position, I think, later in this chapter that even if these just decision doesn't help you individually immediately or obviously, it will in the long run, even if it hurts your present self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
It's true.
an interesting way to look at proper statesmanship, and that's what will end up helping society in the republic.
Mm-hmm.
Republic being not Plato's republic, but
Yes, but the
Roman
Roman Republic, yes. So then we get into what Polybius actually did, and what he did was give the first articulate account of Roman political institutions and their success in his book, The Rise of the Roman Empire. And so until the 3rd century, the Romans were preoccupied with internal struggles between the upper, or patrician, and lower, or plebeian classes. But they eventually had a firm grip on Italy from the Alps in the north to the Strait of Messina in the south. So Polybius's work then covers the 118 years after the first, or starting from the First Punic War in 264 to Carthage's destruction in 146, after which Rome firmly became an imperial power. So really kind of Rome at its heyday. And so book 6 of this overall work, The Rise of the Roman Empire, discusses why the Roman Republic is superior to all other forms of government, and the key to that is the mixed constitution. And this is something we'll be talking about probably for the rest of this episode. And so he traced the idea of the mixed constitution back to Lycurgus, the creator of the Spartan constitution in the 8th century. And the theory is that a mixed republic incorporates the best elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy in one government. So he kind of points out this idea that mixtures are always stronger than their parts. It combines the decisiveness of monarchy and the variety of opinions of democracy and everything like that, and tries to find the best possible way to get this to work. And so Polybius inherited the idea that change is decay. We must get the constitution right at the outset. However, Rome had not done so, as it began with a flawed system and achieved a mixed constitution through trial and error. And so then the big question after this section is, how exactly they did that. But it is notable, sort of that whole history of Rome is fascinating, because he points out here, of course, they had kings. Rome did, in fact, have kings from the beginning, and we see that, up until really what Polybius starts describing as, the rise of the Roman Empire, where we get the shift in power, and, he starts asking how exactly they managed that. That's kind of the next section here.
So I think we're going to be talking about the mixed republic for the rest of this season, not just this episode. But what are your thoughts about the present United States political system? Do you think it's how would you view it relative to what Polybius is talking about as far as the mixed system in Rome?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, well, I think we'll get into this a little bit later of exactly how it differs and things like that. But I do agree with him that we do need a mixed system. We'll kind of get into the individual parts, but you do need a certain amount of decisiveness. You can't just have the democracy of Athens where it's just everybody says something and it's like, well, what if we want to change our minds, and it's just too many opinions being thrown out at once. And you do need to have sort of those checks on everything. We'll get into how the Roman Republic actually functioned, but I mean, we do have a very different system now, but I think it is still founded on those same values that Polybius is describing here, at least to an extent.
I think we've become an oligarchy.
You think so?
Yeah, I think we have less. I think an oligarchy that just tries to manipulate the people, the democracy side of it.
Interesting.
On the federal level, at least.
Why do you think that?
Is there a United States senator that's not at least a millionaire or a multimillionaire? They're all wealthy.
That's a good point.
Every last one of them. And no one can be a United States senator without being, a complete crook and or a multimillionaire. And it's starting to be true of all congressmen too.
Interesting.
And if they're not a multimillionaire when they get in office, they certainly are when they leave, if they ever leave.
Yeah, I think we can get into that a little bit. Rome kind of faced a similar situation with how their centuries were set up and stuff like that. But we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But then we go on to discuss, how Rome was peculiar, how exactly it managed this. And so Polybius sets up a similar form of good and bad governments to Aristotle. So, you have the monarchy is good while, the kingship is bad. The politeia is good while the democracy is bad, that sort of stuff. And he sets up a similar system of change as well. He says that leaders who rise by talent will initially rouse no hostility, while those who inherit a throne will arouse envy. They will be opposed by men of the upper class. And then when the king is eventually overthrown by this upper class, their aristocratic supplanters will rule which then devolves into oligarchy, which is then overturned and replaced by democracy. A disgusted public then turns to a dictator, beginning the cycle of oligarchy, democracy, dictatorship again. However, a democracy following one man was not always a bad thing, and he kind of points out Pericles commanding Athens, but then that's also countered by Alcibiades following Athens. But the problem there was not that he was one man ruling over the whole population, but that he was a crook. So it's fine if you're a good person ruling over the population, but as soon as you do some bad things, that kind of becomes a flawed system. And so he says that the danger that led to Rome's extinction of the Republic had deep roots. The conquests in the Mediterranean put enormous wealth in the hands of the political and social elite, allowing a military leader to use that wealth to secure an army and seize power by force. And so a rich and bold leader like Julius Caesar was essentially inevitable. Once you get that sort of consolidation, that ability to raise an army like that, what is stopping these people from just taking over completely? And that's kind of what's pointed out here.
Well, I don't know that it was inevitable that Rome would collapse. I mean, after the Roman Empire went away, the Byzantine Empire lasted 1,500 years, maybe longer. I'm trying to remember. Like that. I mean, it was. So I don't see that. I mean, I know that they felt that because they were in the middle of chaos, but it lasted a very long period of time. And the Byzantine Empire, which wasn't too dissimilar of a system, lasted a long time after that. And so I don't know that it follows that it can't be maintained. I think part of the problem is, of course, the corruption, but also the inability of the poor to ascend, probably, and the lack of institutional control, and with the corruption and the civil wars. I mean, you can't have active fighting and murder and mayhem and assassinations on a periodic basis and expect any society to last.
That is a good point. I think that's pretty characteristic of a society that will not last if they are constantly facing civil war.
Yeah, so but it goes back to like what Aristotle was talking about, that you have to have a citizenry that deserves the government it has. And if the people, including the rulers, don't have a certain level of ethics and sense of justice, it doesn't matter what system you have, because they're going to corrupt it and they're going to kill each other.
Fair enough. That's a pretty bleak outlook, but I mean, I can't find too many faults with it.
Well, and I think that's why the American experiment lasted so long, because you had a certain level of education for the people that were selected as leaders, and you had a culture, and I'm not advocating for this, but they also had for a long period of time a certain code of conduct that was not legal. It was extra legal for dueling, and so if you defamed someone else, like with all these political campaigns, nobody decent wants to run for office in America, and part of it is because you can't just go out there and say, "Hey, I believe in this," and the other person says, "No, I don't believe in that. I believe in something else," and then you let the people decide. No, it's Joe Smith is a rapist. Somebody is a pedophile. They're a thief, and just it's just the complete destruction of somebody's reputation and all that. You say 1/100th of those things back in the late 1700s, and you're going to be dueling. You're going to be pistols at dawn. But they had a system set up so that you had a second, then they would negotiate with each other, and maybe all you have to do is apologize, or you come to some sort of compromise, because maybe the person who got offended too easily, and then you just kind of release a statement, or you reach an accommodation. And so most of those threats of a duel didn't end up in a duel, but if they get, if you went too far and the other side, wanted to push it, it's gonna be pistols. And people died, like Alexander Hamilton.
It's interesting that you bring that up, especially like talking about how it's not so much about I believe in this, and why don't I believe in this. It's like more so attacking the other person's character almost. And this is something
Right.
that I feel like is pretty pervasive through a lot of things in our culture now. I was talking about this last week on my, music talk show on the radio about how it's like
Mm.
not so much about the musician's art or the music that they're making. If you see a headline, it's not going to be, oh, they released a new album, let's talk about how good their album is. It's, oh, who are they having a baby with? Who did they yell at on Twitter today? And it's like, I don't know, so much of it's about, the person and not actually what they're doing. And I feel like, that's something that's missing a lot too. I mean, in politics and in, popular culture as well.
Yep. And that's where I have a little glimmer of optimism because of Trump.
Why is
And you
that?
could think, how could that possibly be optimistic take on Trump in this, celebrity culture? And you're saying it shouldn't be a celebrity culture. It should be about what you do or what you believe. But what Trump did was he had tremendous scandals.
Hmm.
He had the tape release, the grab him by the P word,
Hmm.
tape that came out in the middle of the campaign, and any other Republican, for sure, politician would have just folded up the tents, gone home, or just had like a minimal campaign from that out. I don't know, maybe have quit the campaign. Trump just stayed silent for 2 weeks and said, "I don't care," and went back on the road again. And then, of course, he brought to his next speech or the debate um, a couple people that one of them said that Bill Clinton raped him,
Mm.
raped her, and then the other two sexual harassment claims. Just kind of highlight the hypocrisy. Like, okay, I did this, but he did that, and that was
Yeah.
okay with everybody. But what I mean by that is that I shouldn't have gotten so much in the details. Is that Trump was able just to take all those insults,
Hmm.
and it just seemed to just fall off of it, and then he just went about doing what he espousing. If you listen to his speeches, there's a lot of jokes and this and that, but there's a lot of really good red meat public policy provisions that he is advocating that mean something.
Hmm.
And so if we can get enough politicians that just say, piss off. I shouldn't say those words, but because I know we're supposed to be not profane. We get enough politicians that say, I'm going to run. I don't care what you say about me.
Hmm.
I'm going to literally talk about the issues, because a lot of them say, well, I'm going to talk about the issues, but then they just give like talking points, and they don't really go into the details as far as, well, like Biden's criticizing Republicans because of abortion. And so the press secretary is asked the other day, okay, well, there's a proposed nationwide ban at 15 weeks. At what number of weeks is this Catholic president saying it's okay to ban abortion? And she wouldn't answer. So maybe if we had enough politicians that and the voting public would say, you know what, I'm not even going to pay attention to it. I think you're like my attitude towards Trump and the rest of them, they're all terrible.
Yeah.
What are they going to do? And if
Hmm.
we had enough politicians that focused on that, we had enough voters that focused on that, I think we get past it. But then we would get the government we deserve, because right now we're getting the government we deserve
Hmm.
collectively,
True.
because we're paying attention to that. We're getting swayed by it,
Hmm.
and we're not paying attention to what the issues are. There's never Trumpers. Oh, never Trump. Well, why? Why exactly? Oh, he's terrible. He's a horrible person. Okay, so are the rest of them. You know,
Yeah,
tell me something I don't know. I don't
that's
care.
true. Good
You know,
points.
I mean, was George W. Bush God's gift to humanity? I don't think so. You know, who was? What's the last? Uh, you know, elected official that was God's gift to humanity? They aren't.
Hmm.
Anyway, so but I think getting back to our program here.
Yes. Regular
uh,
scheduled
yeah,
program.
there were, I think the discussion of what a good citizen is and what a good leader is important to go hand in hand.
Hmm.
If you're going to have a healthy society and a functioning society that lasts, you gotta have all of that. Otherwise, it is
Hmm.
going to collapse.
All right, so now we're going to move into why the Roman Republic succeeded at all. And so this is where I'm going to take a lot of words and describe how it actually functioned. So this might be a little bit of me talking. But it was a
Are
mixed
you
republic.
are you reading from the book?
I'm not
Or
reading from the book. I'm reading from my notes, which are
all right.
very long.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh. All right.
and so the mixed republic secured the stability of free institutions. So citizens were ruled by law, not the whims of tyrants. And freedom gave all Romans something that they would fight to preserve. And so this was this whole concept of liberty under law. But this freedom was not the modern notion of individual liberty or laissez-faire or Athenian freedom. The lowest class had few rights beyond the right to vote for magistrates and laws, and eligibility for office was confined to the richest class. The republic itself was free from subjection to other states, and its citizens were free from personal oppression by any other Roman, and free Romans possessed negative liberty. They were not vulnerable to anything other than legally prescribed penalties for misconduct, and according to their status, they might one day have positive liberty, entitlement to occupy office and make laws. So that sort of notion of liberty is very central to the Roman system. And so Polybius held that consuls represented the monarchical element, the Senate the aristocratic, the popular assemblies the democratic. This is not the modern separation of powers. Instead, this was all mixed within one untidy system. And so the consuls were elected for 1 year only, and there were 2 of them in number, and each could veto the acts of the other, and their major role was to command the Roman armies. They were an elective office, so they were to an extent answerable to the people, and they were required to hold the lower offices of quaestor and praetor first to prove their worthiness. The Senate was composed of members of the highest social rank, and they were appointed by the consuls. It originally had 100 members, but this was expanded to 300 and then 900 when Caesar was dictator, since so large a body could not perform their executive duties. The Senate had complete executive power when the consuls were absent from Rome. They supervised taxes and foreign relations, and a general in the field who was on bad terms with the Senate would soon run out of supplies and reinforcements and could even be withdrawn, but senators were subject to charges of unpatriotic conduct if they did this without good reason. And so the Senate proposed legislation to the popular assemblies, whose assent was required before legislation became law, and criminal cases were also heard in assemblies, not the Senate. So this sort of notion was kind of that Roman people possessed ultimate authority. They elected magistrates, they approved laws, they conducted criminal cases, and the important point was that every element needed the concurrence of the others to perform effectively. I'm going to read just this couple sentences from the book. He says, consuls could not antagonize the Senate.
What page? Hold on. What page are you on?
I'm on page 132.
Very good.
Consuls could not antagonize the Senate. The people had no spontaneous authority, but their choices in elections decided whose career advanced and whose did not. The Senate would cover itself in ignominy if it made life impossible for soldiers in the field, and so on. A balance between the elements was the Constitution's most striking feature. And so this is the idea of the mixed constitution in the Roman Republic, not so much that you had separate powers between them all, but that each kind of looked over the other and had powers that could veto the other section of the government, and each had, of course, different powers within that system. So an interesting setup, but also very untidy. You don't have the judicial and the executive and the legislative that we do. They all kind of perform the same duties, but in a way different to each other.
Yeah, and I think what we're struggling with today, to talk about a reference to the United States, is that you've had the judicial try to do the legislative. You have the legislative branch that has delegated almost all authority to the executive, and so you have this weird melding of a judicial executive authority. So you've got there's too many Americans that say, well, what does the Supreme Court say we can do? Well, nothing. The answer should be nothing. They have usurped too much power. But you talk about it being messy. Well, it's only because they've combined the authorities within the structure. So you have the Senate, you got the Assembly, and they have delegated authority in certain areas. But it's only messy compared to a true constitution of the United States, where you have different functions separated out, they kind of battle out each other, and then within the legislature you have the Senate and the House further kind of dividing the authority, this division of authority and responsibility, and the checks and balances, and yeah, so
it's almost like really does. It's almost like we've gotten closer to the Roman system with how we've kind of spread out our power throughout all 3 branches, but now we don't have the same checks because we've set up the functions, separately to how they're originally designed, and so we don't have a check over everything as much.
Correct. Right. And the Roman Republic it was pretty effective, and I think it lasted. To answer the other question, it lasted as long as it did because it did have kind of release valves. You need to have if you have one powerful group of society that doesn't have the ability to have their voice heard or their power asserted, or some sort of accountability for wrongs that happen to them, That's dangerous. And so when you have these three separate systems set up within the Roman Republic, it helped alleviate that, and it forced the other two, or the other, group, one of the other versus the other two, to either accommodate them or at least deal with it.
Hmm.
That's the danger of the present political system, is there's too many people outside the system and too few people really have bought into it, and
Yeah.
it's becoming dangerous. And but you know, we'll see how it goes going forward. And if I seem more and more cynical in the last couple of episodes, I've been watching a documentary about the Spanish Civil War, and it's really spooking me. Because I've been interested in civil wars, like our Civil War, the United States Civil War, was different because it was regional. It was the North and the South, and they had really pretty clear demarcation lines geographically, as far as who believed in what and on which
Hmm.
side. But the present system were marbled together with each other, which in some ways I'm more optimistic about it, because it'd be very hard to go to war with your next door neighbor.
Hmm.
But the Spanish Civil War showed that, yeah, you can, and so did the partition of India.
Hmm.
And neither one of them are examples of a happy ending.
Yeah,
For,
that's what I was about to say. Those are not good examples
no,
in terms of wars.
no, yeah. Well, are there good examples in terms of war?
I guess not really. No.
Yeah, the civil wars, I mean, it's most brutal. They're that chaos. But anyway, I was interested. They actually had practicing anarchists.
Really?
They assumed power in Catalonia,
Hmm.
and then they assumed well, they didn't really assume power because they refused to assume power because they're anarchists. It's fascinating. But they overthrew, and they of course burned down churches and
Mhm.
monasteries, and it's always like that with the communists. And that if they would have just gone more incrementally, they would have been able to be a lot more successful. But they had to kill the nuns. It's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's no,
But
word of
back to
advice. A word of advice: do not side with the political party that is in favor of killing the nuns.
yeah,
I don't think.
murdering and setting afire the nuns in the
Yeah, that's
monastery. It's like,
ugh,
oh my goodness,
that's not a good way to go.
I get that the church is corrupt, but maybe
Yeah. Step too
a little
far.
little moderation in your overthrowing of the the power. Fight the
Yes.
power. Let's burn the nuns. What? Wait a second. I don't remember signing up for that. How about we just kill the priests? Probably got a guy on waiting for that, but I think the nuns were a bridge too far. Anyway,
Yeah. So
but
moving on.
yeah, it was a good summary of the Roman Republic, and I think that kind of structure where you have divided power, but you still have the effective use of power.
Mhm.
You have to be able to be effectively to deal with any crisis that comes up. It really is, and then of course their expansion, and being able to expand quickly and bring that money back in, the source of revenue because of the expansion and conquering and the tributes and all that. Money softens the blow for a lot of different things, and if everybody's making a lot of money, they're gonna get along a lot better.
Yeah. I was
It's when
also
they stop
fascinated.
expanding that you have a problem.
Mhm. I was also fascinated by the fact that there were two consuls at a time, which are,
Mm.
somewhat related, I guess, to presidential duties in a way, at least in terms of their power. It kind of reminded me of like the previous system that we had in America, where the runner-up to the presidential election became the vice president, and so you kind of had very dysfunctional executive branches because each was just, very mad at the other in those two high seats. In the executive branch. So it kind of makes me wonder how often, like the two people in the consulship, because they had the direct power to veto the other, how often it was that they just disagreed on everything and nothing really got done too effectively in the consul position.
Yeah, that's certainly the risk, if you're trying to manage it with two polar opposites, it's
Hmm.
it's really not doable. And I in my professional life, there's one public entity board that the legislature set up to have an even number of board members, and I've had some difficulties. Like, there's a 6-member board. Well, if you have a 3-3 split,
Yeah.
if you have two factions, 3-3, you're really stuck.
Hmm.
If they're dug in, you can't do anything. You can't accomplish anything.
Mm.
And as an example, you have to have a majority vote to go into closed session to talk about litigation or personnel. And there were months they didn't go into closed session
Huh. Wow.
because they couldn't. It was 3-3, and
Huh.
so it was all open session, or they didn't talk about those topics. It was really, really, really difficult.
That's
And
bizarre.
and
Yeah.
so when I see two councils, you get if you can't you have to have some sort of tiebreaker.
Hmm.
Other than, like you said, you have some sort of some sort of impasse.
Hmm.
And now I'm sure they had a mechanism to deal with that. And of course, if one person was being unreasonable, they're going to throw that person out.
Yes.
But there's got to be a mechanism for that. But yeah, you're right. The vice president used to be the runner up.
Hmm.
Of course, the vice president doesn't have any power, but the vice president's they're waiting. I wish he'd just die already. Then I will have power. Here, do you want this soup? What? I made it special for you.
All right, moving on to the idea of citizenship within the Roman Republic, which was a
Yeah.
huge deal
Oh
because
yeah.
the Romans had achieved what the Greeks had failed to do. As they expanded, they incorporated conquered peoples into their system of citizen rights and duties.
And that's why they were able to maintain the power for
Hmm.
so long, where the Greeks were not able to.
Yeah. I mean, he says right here that it protected the incorporated from Roman exploitation that would have led to resentment, and it opened military and political careers to ambitious provincials ready to be loyal to Rome. So kind of the best of both worlds. It protects the people that they conquered, and it also, gives Rome the chance to say, hey, I know you fought against us in this war, but you're a great general. Do you want to come help serve us and then further expand our empire here?
And by the way, that's the biggest threat to our country right now is the diminution of the value of citizenship
Mm,
within our country, with all the legal immigrants coming in, and just blurring the line between what American citizen is and what a citizen of the world is. There's no citizen of the world, but they want to call themselves that. But keep that in mind. In 5 years, it's going to be a big deal.
all right. So Roman citizenship was based in the state, in military, and financial needs. So all males between 17 and 60 were liable for military service. So legions of citizen militias were raised as needed, and a conscripted man might serve for as long as 18 years. And there were three orders of citizens: senatorial, equestrian, and popular. The senators and the equites formed an aristocracy of wealth, education, and ambition, and below them were the common people, or the populace. Now, the populace was divided into 5 classes of financial standing and taxable and military capacity, and this was divided by censors, who also allocated citizens to 35 geographically based tribes. So the basis of military draft and electoral, legislative, and judicial systems was these tribes, and these were further divided into 10 centuries by financial standing and age. So each century casted one vote according to simple majority within the century. The best off centuries had fewer citizens, so each well off citizen's vote had more weight than a poor man's. The soldiers also provided their own armor, weapons, and horses. They were supposed to be self sufficient. Their subsistence was deducted from their pay. To stand for office, a man must first had to undertake military service. So the cities that Rome first subdued were often first admitted, with the inhabitants having civil rights but no voting rights, allowing Rome to assimilate its nearest neighbors first and then spread elsewhere. This changed in 212 AD when the Emperor Caracalla extended citizenship to every free person in order to widen the tax base. Women had the same civil rights.
Congratulations, you're a citizen. Now give me your money.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Women had the same civil rights as men, but could not vote or hold office, but they could own property and dispose of it by sale or testament. So heiresses were very important, and marriage, divorce, and adoption were prominent features of Roman politics. So first-class citizens had the rights to vote and hold office, but second-class citizens still had important rights, especially jus provocationis, the right to appeal to the assembly against a magistrate's sentence. And so the interesting thing about this is that this actually relates to a Christian story. When St. Paul asserted his citizenship, was told you have appealed to Caesar you shall go. It was his jus provocationis that he exercised. Among the other privileges that citizenship carried were the rights not to be subjected to crucifixion, not to be tortured when asked to give evidence, and not to be scourged. One might, upon conviction and after the failure of an appeal, be beaten with rods and beheaded, but that was another matter. Less dramatically, citizenship carried rights to engage in trade, to marry, to use the civil courts in litigation, and to bequeath property by will. The concept of politics is Greek, the concept of a legal system is Roman. We also had this idea of patrias potestas, the absolute authority of the male head of the household over its members. And this was unchallengeable. In theory, a man could sell his children into slavery or kill them for any reason that seemed good to him. So a bit of an interesting concept there at the end, but based on the citizenship, we kind of almost see not necessarily a Bill of Rights, but definitely more enumerated powers like delegated to the citizens than I think we have seen in political systems in the past. Like, this is very clear. Okay, you have these rights and stuff, and you can appeal this here and those sorts of things. So you definitely have the start of a legal system that's more familiar to us today.
Oh yeah, I mean that was very important because as an individual you have certain rights that can't be taken away just by anybody. There's a process, but of course it's kind of like, well, if you've been sentenced to be scourged, or whatever the case may be, and you appeal it, I guess then you can be beaten with rods and decapitated if you lose your appeal. So I'd be interested to see how the lawyers talk to. Well, you can hire me for an appeal, and will I win? Well, I think you might win. What happens if I lose? Well, you'll be beheaded. Well, can I just take the scourge? Yeah, maybe if you want to. I think I might be able to win it for you. Just think that's kind of funny.
That is funny.
Because now, if you lose your appeal, you just get the original sentence.
Hmm.
Maybe we should have ump the ante. Like if you lose your appeal in a criminal trial, your sentence is doubled.
I don't
That's
know.
not a bad idea.
I mean,
Or you add 10%. Yeah, why not? Well, why do you get a free appeal? There's no risk. Everybody appeals.
I guess that's true.
Yeah,
Interesting.
you got to start discouraging these people from using their civil rights.
That's what you like to hear. That's fantastic. But yeah, going back to this idea of citizenship, I mean, I think it's really hard to understate its importance here because this is the first time I think we've really seen anything like this, especially like an empire like Rome. I mean, previous empires, I mean, look at the Persian Empire. If you were conquered by Persia, you were never really a Persian citizen. I mean, I would assume you were often killed or you were just kind of, kept there and your stuff was taken and sent to the king for the most part.
Well,
But here we
even
see,
if you're Persian, you're not a Persian citizen.
yes.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, this was unique to Rome.
Hmm.
And the Greeks had something like it, but no other country that I'm aware of
Hmm.
that predates Rome had this concept of a citizenship that you are like an atom, not ADAM, but like you are the fundamental building
Yes.
block of society and of the nation and of the political structure,
Hmm.
and that is not how any other society was believed at that time that I'm aware
Hmm. That is true.
of.
Yeah, so then we move on. Now that we've kind of set up what the actual system was, we now move on to Cicero, who was alive kind of during the fall of this system, and he got to witness a
Right.
lot of the problems that came up with the dictators rising to power. And so Cicero's speeches, writings, and personal correspondence form some of the most important historical resources for understanding the Roman system. De Republica and De Legibus, or the Laws, were written during the 50s BC when Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar took over, and De Officiis, the Duties, was written in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination. Now, De Officiis was the most renowned. He says Cicero's skill was to combine ideas about virtue from Stoic, Platonic, and Aristotelian sources while glossing over their differences, and to make them applicable not only to the Roman statesman but to the citizen of the world. The idea that human beings are citizens of the world, governed by the laws of nature and of peoples, as well as citizens of an earthly state, was Stoic in origin, but so appealing to
No, no,
Christian Europe.
hold on. I think you got the citizens of the world mean the worldly physical realm
Yes.
as opposed to having an afterlife. Morality is important for your afterlife. Isn't that
Hmm.
right? Yeah.
Yes, that is true. He said the idea that human beings are citizens of the world, governed by the laws of nature and of peoples, as well as citizens of an earthly state, was Stoic in origin, but so appealing to Christian Europe was its formulation in Cicero's work that he all but became an honorary father of the church.
Yeah.
Augustine credited Cicero with first turning his mind toward God. So Cicero is very focused on using Greek ideals to describe the gentlemanly statesman who would hold power in an idealized republic. So Cicero very greatly lamented the ruin of the republic. His account of politics veer between a constitutional emphasis on the way good institutions allow a state to function by recruiting men of good but not superhuman character, but he also kind of bounces between this heroic emphasis on the role of truly great men and reconstructing or first constructing a new state. And with this, he had himself in mind, of course,
Yeah.
the very heroic Cicero.
Well, and that's like the great man theory, which I think
Mm-hmm.
there's some truth to it in historical figures that some people just make a bigger difference or
Mm-hmm.
make the right decision or maybe the wrong decision. But if you're designing a system, the most important thing is the system to deal with great people and also to deal with horrible people. Like if you have
Mm-hmm.
a complete incompetent dummy like we do in the United States, you have to have a system to address that.
Hmm.
And so we have a short term, and relatively he's got 4 years to screw up as much as he can. But if he's even horrible, we can impeach him, like they impeached Trump twice or whatever.
Hmm.
And as long as the Senate went along with it, which they didn't, he could have been removed early, but
Yeah.
or impeached after he's out, which was pointless. But yeah, so this focus on this kind of interesting discussion of whether or not you have to get it right initially, and
Hmm.
it's been throughout this chapter. This theory of Cicero espouses that you have to get the system right, perfect, as perfect as you can when you set it up,
Hmm.
because it'll degrade over time. Um, I don't think that's true. I think it's true to a certain extent, but it just has to be able to be modifiable
Yes.
within limits. And I don't think our author really addresses the constitutional amendment process
Hmm.
with the United States Constitution, where they ratified immediately, amend it 10 times,
Hmm.
the Bill of Rights. And so there's a process and a structure to change it. And I think that might be one of the problems with Rome, is that you didn't really have that set in a certain procedural element. And then, of course, the problem with us now is that the Supreme Court tries to amend it willy nilly,
Hmm.
and has over the last 8 years or so, and that's really undermined the Constitution itself. But people, if they want to have abortion as a constitutional right, well, you got to amend the Constitution, put it in there. And if you do, then everybody's got to live with it.
Hmm.
But it involves a process of the vast majority of the people have to agree to it,
True.
and that's hard, you
Yeah.
know. But it's been done a whole bunch of
Hmm.
times. Not in a long time though. Not in my lifetime. I don't think. I think the last amendment was before. Wasn't the last amendment was for? What was the last amendment for? Is that
It
for
was pay
pay?
raises. Congress cannot, if
Oh, is that
Congress
the
gives
most
themselves a
recent one
pay
then?
raise, yeah, that has to apply in the next Congress, not
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah. But I was thinking the one. What I was thinking of was the presidential succession, because I know they had to update that, but maybe it
That no,
wasn't.
that was the second most recent because that was after
Okay.
I think it was after JFK was that
Yeah.
one was put into place, and
Right.
then after that you had the pay raise amendment, which was the
Yeah.
most recent.
Yeah. It's a little hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Easy one.
All right. So moving on from that idea of like the heroic emphasis, the interest of De Republica and De Legibus lies in how Cicero unites Greek philosophy and Polybius's theory of the mixed constitution to formulate a recipe for stable government. He insists that the Roman mas maiorum, which translates to the custom of our ancestors, incorporates the wisdom of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics and applies it to this new system. So in De Republica, he has the character of Scipio the Younger describe the historical account of the best actual state. And of course, this was Rome. And he really rebukes Plato's obsession with utopias. He's really like, okay, well, when have we actually done this? And he says, well, the closest thing to the best system is Rome itself. So how was that founded? And De Republica ends with Scipio's dream, which for a long time was the only part of this work that survived. And it recounts how Scipio has a dream of his grandfather, Scipio Africanus, and he is urged to remember that the earth is vast, that he is unknown to most of mankind, and that the only good really worth having is to be had in heaven amid the music of the spheres. So kind of acknowledging that, hey, you've done great things, but keep in mind that, there's more to it than that. So that was very influential in Christian thinking, especially throughout the Middle Ages.
Yes.
And so De Republica, or in Cicero, in both De Republica and De Legibus, defines the nature of a commonwealth. It must be owned by the people. And so justice is the defining feature. The task of politics is to promote a common good that belongs to the whole people. And so what he defines common good as is the pursuit of happiness according to reason. And so humans are naturally sociable and take pleasure in company outside of practical returns. And so we all share this common good and the interest in its pursuit. However, we also have private interests at odds with other private interests and common interests that are against, and private interests that are against the common interess. And so, good
Or maybe
institutions.
not against, but in conflict with them. You
Yes,
know what I'm saying?
yes.
Not like armed conflict, but they are not consistent with,
Hmm.
everybody else benefits if I benefit. Sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, he says good institutions protect the common interest against erosion by private interests and prevent conflicts of private interest from becoming destructive. What these institutions must be is the subject matter of political theory. So that's essentially what he's saying is the purpose of all government. We have to promote this common good and make sure that is applicable to all people.
And it's a common good, not just a utilitarian
Yes.
math equation. It's about justice and what's best for everybody, as opposed to just adding up a figure, who gets what.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but what struck me as I read this, and then again as you summarize it, and you do a great job, of course, is do any of our elected officials really think about these concepts anymore? Do you think they do?
I don't
Like,
think so. I think that's also kind of a product of like, people want, morality to not be discussed at all. That's what
yeah,
I found in a lot of like political discussions. Like, well, the law isn't moral. You shouldn't make moral judgments and place them into law. And it's like, but we already have. Explain to
right,
me without going into morals why murder is wrong. Like it can be very practical. It can be very, beneficial for me to kill my neighbor and take all his
right.
stuff, but we know that that is morally wrong. We have morals enshrined in our laws. And so I think the reason that we're not even looking at like common good or, what's best for everybody, what should we be pursuing, it kind of stems down to that, which is a really weird way of thinking that I think has really, really come about in recent years.
Yeah, and we've gotten away from there's the two. I mentioned this in a previous season, I think, where you have some laws that are prohibited. It's like the criminal laws. There's malum and se and malum and prohibitum.
Hmm.
So malum and se is that it's wrong in and of itself. It'd be wrong whether we made it illegal or not.
Hmm.
And then malum prohibitum is that we just prohibit it, like the speed limit set at an arbitrary. Not, I mean, I know they're supposed to be based upon the engineering of the road and all that stuff, but some of it's not. It's just,
Hmm.
well, we don't want people to go too fast, and we think, but that's an example of what's prohibited. Or there's like all sorts of federal laws that are criminal now if you don't comply with certain regulations. And it's like, well, wait a second, is that really a crime?
Hmm.
Or maybe you should just have a administrative fee or something.
Yeah.
Why is that a felony?
Hmm.
And we've gotten, you're absolutely right. We've gotten, and I think there's just, I think it's a reflection of the fact that people are not religious.
Hmm.
I think non-believer, I think, might be the biggest category now.
Might be.
Whether you call that atheist or agnostic or whatever, but a non-religious person, not just non-practicing, but they aren't Christian, they aren't any sort of affiliation. And yeah, I think you're right. But I think that, but even aside from religion, um, you don't have politicians or anybody, even like the very few activists. Now, there's a big push in the last year or two with national conservatives, and really talking about the theoretical basis of conservatism, and more of maybe a religious or ethical basis of it. They just had their NatCom 3 conference, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago, and they're talking about philosophy.
Hmm.
And you used to see that on the liberal side too. That's the basis of the reprehensible Jesuits, the social justice teaching. At least that's based in some sort of concept of morality.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but yeah, you just don't see that. You think, oh, it's either legal or not, or I should just be able to decide all that stuff for myself. Okay, well, let us know when you make a decision, and then I
Yeah.
guess we'll decide if it should be illegal or not. And usually it's like, well, if it inconveniences me, I don't want it illegal, and
Hmm.
if I don't like you, then you should be illegal. But
Yeah.
it's really really, but I just don't see a lot of the mainstream, like the speeches that people give now. It's like uh, uh, shorthand
Hmm.
morality.
Yeah.
Like it's just almost name calling, like Biden's red wedding speech the other day. Uh, the satanic images and all that kind of stuff with the red background, which that
Yeah.
was fun. He's just saying MAGA Republicans are neo-fascists.
Hmm.
Well, he doesn't define, number one, what MAGA Republicans are, and he doesn't define what fascists are. And he certainly doesn't define what neo-fascists are.
Yeah.
So what does it even mean?
I mean, it
It
kind of
just
goes
means,
back to what we were talking about earlier. So much of it is about the person and not the actual substance.
yeah,
I think we've
right,
moved, it's kind of come in steps. First we remove like the morals from the substance. Like we are still talking about policy and things going forward with that, but we've kind of removed a lot of the moral aspect. And now we've even removed the substance of it. And now it's just people saying things and criticizing the other person without actually talking about any substance and certainly not any morals.
right, right. Yeah, it's interesting.
Hmm.
It's not going to end well unless we refocus on having these discussions again.
Hmm.
And I think the abortion discussions are fascinating. Because once you take it out of the Supreme Court, Bigfooted it and said, well,
Hmm.
you're not going to have it. And now each state is going to have a discussion about what each state wants to do. And, the devil's in the details on that one for sure, more so than most any other, certainly most any other criminal law.
Yeah.
Because, okay, well, when are you going to just say never? And that's kind of a hairy subject. And so are you going to say, 15 weeks? You say 12 weeks? Most of Europe, I think, is 12 weeks or less.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to say 15? If not 15, why aren't you saying it? There's so many people that are saying, well, we just don't want to have any regulations. You can do it the day before they're born. And it's like, well, why don't you do it a week later? What if you have buyer's remorse? What's the difference? And it's forcing people to say what the difference is. So I think that's beneficial. And I think it'll be beneficial going forward just to have different states do different things. And we'll maybe have maybe be able to have those kind of conversations of what is life and what is good.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, it's definitely not a pretty conversation or a fun conversation to have, but I think it is good that it is happening because it's something that's very clear on the world stage about something like what is moral here. It's not just about how do we legislate this, what are the, outcomes and blah, 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 blah. It's like, actually, what are we actually doing here? What is this thing and how do we get these answers?
Yeah. And of course, nobody, and it should be, and it used to be, it was always considered bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then, the discussion was how do we reduce it? But then now they're like, people are celebrating it as, I don't know, whatever. But
yes. Moving back to the book.
Back to the topic.
I don't know how we got there, but anyway.
We can get there again.
I'm sure we could very easily. But moving on.
We're talking about how nobody talks about these big issues that Cicero talks about. And they're still important today. These same topics that Cicero's talking about. How do you have a just leader? How do you balance those interests?
Yes.
How do you have a just society?
And that is why we are here. We are bringing these questions back to our millions of listeners who are
there's at least one.
At least, yes. But yes, going back to the content here, the De Republica.
You know that this is going to be somehow always out there.
Yes.
Like 50 years from now, I'll be dead, but this will be in some sort of database.
Well, assuming it is still paid for, because I think if we miss our payments to Buzzsprout, it gets taken down.
Mother mercy. We're going to have a hard copy and put it up on the web or something.
I mean, I have all the files. I do. But we could, I guess we could make a website if we really wanted to.
We're going to do something.
All right. That's a topic for later time. Back to the book for the third time I think I've said this in the span of 5 minutes. De Republica celebrates the success.
Hey, Spotify will have it. I mean, Spotify has it now. Apple Podcasts has it. So
that is because it is through our podcast provider. They have the rights, I think, to take it down because it automatically puts it up. And if we miss a payment or something, or if we, stop paying them, I think it takes it back down.
We need to get around those people.
Yes.
Okay,
all right. Yes. Going back to the book, celebrates the success of the Roman Republic until 133 BC, when Tiberius Gracchus put in agrarian reforms that led to his assassination. And so Cicero points to this as the first serious domestic violence in decades. And so this marked the beginning of the conflict that led to the decline of the Roman Empire. He says that Rome was more successful than Sparta because an orderly process of experiments brings a variety of perspectives and reveals the truth that one man may overlook. So he says, Sparta had a good system, but it was put into place by one man, supposedly. And the reason Rome succeeded is because it was put into place over many years. And so we got a bunch of different opinions on that. And so Cicero
but he's kind of wrong about that because Sparta had a very structured system and would not integrate anybody else within the system. All you'd be doing is adding slaves, or you're increasing your native population. So they conquer people and they're just subjects. So
yes.
But anyway, go ahead.
And so Cicero acknowledges that many ordinary Romans had little opportunity to participate in politics. The centuries were so organized that the wealthy centuries outnumbered the poor, and voting stopped when a majority of the centuries had been achieved, so many poor people had no opportunity to vote. So here he kind of says that Rome was truly a plutocracy at this point. He says that monarchy would be the best if there was a way to ensure that the kings didn't turn into tyrants, but unfortunately this is the most dangerous system because of that risk, and therefore it is not a practicable form of government. He moves on to say that when people desire liberty, they don't want a good master, but no master. So Roman libertas required people to be self-governing. This was a good part of the system. Says the positives of mixed government were the decisiveness of the one, the expertise of the few, and the common sense and loyalty of the many. But he says that this was more than just checks and balances. He's not looking at it just from like a practical point. He's saying, we actually have, a good variety of opinions here. We have, we have the drive. We have all of these things that contribute to that. But he says that there's less emphasis on the many than we have today. The modern system is infinitely more open to the ordinary person than Cicero would have imagined. But that is what Cicero says.
He would have condemned it because the ordinary citizen today doesn't take it seriously. Doesn't take their own education seriously. Doesn't take an average person. And I think he'd be aghast that we'd have access to all this information and not be reading all day, every day.
Yeah, true.
But we get tired.
Yes.
What's next?
We then move on to the last section in this chapter, I
thought we were already there.
We are now moving into the section, what is good law and the good citizen. And so De Legibus focuses on the relationship between the law of nature, which Cicero describes as moral or divine law, and the law of a particular state. He says, law is the deliverance of right reason. It rests on the natural sociability of mankind. It treats everyone equally. The mere say-so of any particular group of people does not suffice to make their desires law. So it definitely has that sort of ordered process. It's not just built on nothing and affects everyone equally. He says, laws must be made for the right reasons to be laws at all. A law that violates justice is not a law at all.
That's a powerful statement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the basis of all civil disobedience.
True. He then says that De Officiis relies on the view that most disputes between philosophers are terminological. We should attend to what their doctrines have in common because that is what is true in each of them. He says, one truth, many formulations. So his writing is highly political because it presupposes that the listener, or that the advice that he is given, is being given to a public-spirited upper-class citizen ready to serve to the best of his abilities. So that's what he has in mind when writing about the duties of a person. What he really has in mind is this, this one specific class of person, the upper class, who is ready to serve in politics. He says that our duties are not self-interest. The beneficial is not identical with the honorable. However, there is no deep conflict between the useful and the honorable. And that a morally good life is naturally attractive. So this is counter to the previous arguments that we just do what is in our self-interest. He says that's not true at all. What is in our self-interest is not what is good for us. It's separate things, but they are connected. We do naturally want what is morally good. He says that it can never be in our ultimate interest to act unjustly. Wise action is better than theoretical action. Wise action is action within a community. So it's one thing to think about things, but we need to put these into action in a community. It says the foundations of ethics are reason and sociability. It says that reason is unique to humans. We alone reflect on our own natures and the duties that stem from those natures. And then also that sociability aspect is that we want the company of friends for their own sake. So it's not just that we're doing our own thing. It's that we care about the people around us as well. So
that's an interesting concept to me. That morality is based upon, in part, our sociability, our desire to be socially interacting with other people.
Which I think there is truth to that. I think, because we aren't just doing our own thing, I think we do want to look out for our fellow people most of the time. Most people do.
Anyway. I was thinking of the other side of it, where that, like, if somebody's in solitary confinement for too long, it'll drive them mad.
That
because
too.
You have to have that social interaction. If you're lost in a deserted island, you go crazy. You don't have anybody to talk to.
True.
It's true, but I never thought of it as an ethical standard or a basis for morality or ethics.
True. De Officiis is above all an account of the demands of justice. And so what he defines justice is as the desire to give each man his own, to preserve as common what is common, and to keep as private what is private. But this raises the question of how we determine what is justice and what is benevolence. He says that we must not be generous with what is not our own, nor so generous with what is our own that we imperil our future ability to do good. So we should be, generous to an extent. We can't just give everything that isn't ours or just give too much of what is ours, but we should, keep in mind what is just. He also says that
I think our next constitutional amendment should be that. We must not be generous with what is not ours, with taxpayer money.
Yes.
And I wish more public officials, local, state, and federal, would live by that.
Also, in balancing the budget, don't spend more than we have. That is
Yeah.
being exactly what that is. That is generous with what is not yours because it does not even exist. You're just borrowing, going into infinite debt.
Yeah, it's nobody's.
Yes,
Yeah, we're
exactly.
just creating it.
He also says that being well thought of is something to aim at, so long as the people who judge us judge right. That's a big part of his policy here, because of course he is, a big politician and was,
Right,
or at least thought highly of himself at the very least.
right. Seemed fairly vain.
Yes, absolutely. He says that he assimilates Greek philosophy to the mas maiorum of the Romans. It is just to always keep promises, even those made under duress. And so here he brings up the story of Regulus, a Roman general who promised to return to Carthage after being sent to Rome to arrange an exchange of prisoners. However, upon returning to Carthage, he was tortured and killed.
Well, he didn't make the arrangement.
That is true. He did not.
That's why they tortured him.
Yes.
Put him over there, but he went back. So
Mm-hmm.
that's admirable.
Yes, and Cicero, he says, reading from the book, Cicero rather alarmingly insists that he did no more than his duty. Even promises made under duress to an enemy must be kept. Regulus was right to return to the Carthaginians and face martyrdom because he had promised the Carthaginians that he would do so. Conversely, the hostages taken at Cannae were wrong to try to evade their duty to return to their captors. Indeed, says Cicero, Regulus does not deserve great praise for his actions because it was the Republic that made them possible and inevitable. This sets the price at which we might be asked to do our duty very high. But then he goes on to say,
I don't see how you can be consistently say that, but then you would also say that unjust law is not a law.
mm-hmm,
So is an unjust promise, a forced promise, really a promise?
yeah,
I don't think it is. I mean, that goes to our fundamental concept
mm-hmm,
of consent.
yeah.
Um,
I'm
here,
guessing what he's kind of getting at there is like our individual like response to that sort of stuff. Like as opposed to the state must put in just laws, but if we ourselves as an individual promise something, we have to hold ourselves to that.
yeah,
That's
but
what I
if you
would
only
assume his
do it
reasoning
because they're
is.
going to kill you,
Yes.
I think I think you're free to walk away from that one.
Yes. I agree with you
Hold
there.
your
I would
nose
not
down.
like to be tortured and killed.
Although I think that the dude was a stand-up dude, you
Yeah.
know, that's pretty. I would say it's admirable,
hmm
and we would never have know of him except for he did that.
Yes. But
Probably.
then he then goes on to say that, even, but this case is very extreme. He says the demands of duty only stretch as far as the well-educated, well-to-do man is likely to follow. He kind of goes on and talks about, how we must always ask what the distinctly human form of conduct is, as we are not gods or animals. So we shouldn't just be, lashing out at people like a lion, but we also shouldn't think ourselves so highly that we are gods. And so we kind of conclude here that Cicero was unable to save Rome. The spiritual and moral future that he was talking about was not with Mas Maiorum, but with Christianity. And so with that, we will move on to Augustine next time and discuss his political theories there. So what did you think of this chapter overall? What are your thoughts?
I liked it. I like a lot of what Cicero says and
Mm-hmm.
what he's written. I tend to agree with the vast majority of it. I think it's interesting to think about how much he influenced the founders of our country, the United
Mm-hmm.
States, and how a lot of what he said, a lot of what the Romans did and believed at the time, not everything, of course, but a lot of it still are being discussed today. The
Mm-hmm.
proper role of a citizen, the proper role of a government, and how do you set up a structure so that everybody gets their voices heard in a way that manages the country the best. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's the same discussions we're having now.
That is true. Yeah,
What do you think?
I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's still very applicable today, especially when we look at like the mixed constitution sort of stuff. I mean, of course, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Very different in a way to what we have now, but also very similar in its core principles. And this is really the first example that we see of something that kind of more closely resembles our system as it stands.
True, true.
Yes, but I really
Mm,
liked it. I mean, of course, always really well written.
yeah,
I like Alan Ryan's style. I like his summaries. I do think it is interesting how far, I guess, we're kind of jumping now in terms of time span. The
mm,
first three chapters were kind of the history of Greece, then, Plato, then Aristotle. So all relatively close together, especially Plato and Aristotle. But now we've jumped at least a couple hundred years forward, especially from, Aristotle to Cicero, and we'll be jumping, what, about 400 years after
Yeah.
that to get to Augustine. So we'll be entering some periods where I think we're going to be making some big jumps and not discussing um, as many people, but highlighting specific people within certain eras.
Yeah, because there's well, I mean, you go a few hundred years without any really great political thought. I
Hmm.
mean, in Europe, at least the Western world, because you had different bands of people fighting each other. You
True.
know, little kingdoms, fiefdoms, or whatever you want to call them.
Hmm.
And they have a whole bunch of people, writing political theory.
Hmm. But yeah, I'm just looking ahead, like at the table of contents. We'll have Augustine, and then we'll have a large chunk of time that's the chapters just called Between Augustine and Aquinas. So that is
Yeah,
a very large period of time there, where we'll
yeah.
probably just be highlighting some specific people and then kind of moving on. There won't be like one huge political system that we'll be focusing on, rather just the thoughts of a few individual people.
Yep.
All right. Do you have any other closing thoughts before we sign off here?
No, do you?
I do
I've
not,
heard your thoughts.
except that you should follow us on Twitter
Uh,
at ULMTD Opinions on Twitter. You can get updates on when our next episodes are live and things like that. I guess we should still be planning a t-shirt giveaway of some sort. I don't think we've gotten any great reviews as far as I know.
have we gotten any reviews? I don't know. I have to look
I've
at
been
that.
checking Apple Podcasts. I don't think we have,
Maybe
but
we
I
should
could
do
be
like
wrong.
a baseball cap or
A baseball
something.
cap.
It's different.
Hmm. Maybe that'll incentivize people. People don't want T-shirts. They want baseball caps. I don't know, but we should design
Or
something, of
or
course.
a koozie.
Koozie. That's
There's
yeah.
all sorts of swag. We have
There
pins,
there sure is.
hats,
That's what you should let us
t-shirts,
know on Twitter. Tweet at us. Let us know what sort of unlimited opinions merch you would like,
or
um,
bookmarks because there's a book thing,
or
or
bookmarks.
slippers,
Yep,
monogrammed
slippers.
slippers.
We could.
If your
Yep.
toes warm.
Mm-hmm. Yep, let us know anything. The sky's the limit there, I guess, if we're going into slippers. Um, but yes, I guess we don't have anything else to add. So I've been Adam Bishop,
I'm still Mark.
and this has been Unlimited Opinions, Season 4, Episode 5.
Man.
Damn, all right. That was a long one. I don't know how long we were talking, but quite a while.
Well, it took us 20 minutes to get started, and then the dogs barked and stuff.
That is true. It's probably about an hour. We'll see how long this
It's
this
about an hour
recording is
15.
taking.